Bueno, bienvenidos y bienvenidas a todas a una nueva edición del Festival Internacional de Cine de Mar del Plata. En este caso vamos a tener un Q&A de la sección de Panorama de Autores, y es con mucho honor que presentamos esta película, que es una película de Peter Tscherkassky, cineasta austriaco. La película se llama Tren Again. Esta es la tercera entrega, por así decirlo, de Peter Tscherkassky en su serie de películas llamada The Rush Series, de las cuales el festival ya había exhibido en años anteriores sus dos primeras partes, Coming Attractions y The Exquisite Corpus. Y en ese sentido es un gran honor para el festival poder exhibir esta tercera entrega de esa serie. Así que antes que nada, bueno, bienvenido Peter y muchas gracias por estar con nosotros y con nosotras. Y quería preguntarte antes que nada, Tren Again, tu nueva película, parte de una suerte de doble homenaje, por un lado a Kurt Kren, uno de los grandes maestros del cine experimental, el cine de vanguardia austríaco, y por otra parte, como su nombre lo indica también, hay una suerte de homenaje a la figura, por así decirlo, del tren, ¿no? El tren en el cine. Y me parece que es una figura que en tus manos se vuelve medio como el medio o el instrumento ideal para ofrecer lo que la película en definitiva es también, que es una historia, una suerte de historia condensada del cine, ¿no? Y en ese sentido mi primera pregunta era cómo surgió esta idea de hacer confluir ambas intenciones o ambas pasiones, si se quiere, en una misma película, ¿no?
Well, as you know, I'm a found footage filmmaker, and it always starts with some found footage. And in that case, I had been given from a friend as a gift something about like 5 minutes of rushes, so a non-finished footage for a commercial for the Austrian national rail company. And it showed, as you can tell from my film Train Again, in the distance a tunnel and the tracks of the railway, and from the tunnel there comes a train slowly approaching, and it comes nearer and nearer and nearer, and the camera who is standing next to the tracks, it's starting to panning, and then it whoosh goes by, and then it vanishes again in the distance, which you can see it. That was filmed relatively badly, I should say. And we had about 10 different trains coming on the track and going by. And it was so corky, that footage, that I decided I have to do something with that. And it was pure chance that 18 years before that moment where I decided to make that film, I had made another film called L'Arrivée, which was an homage, or is an homage to the Lumiere brothers, and that very famous, one of the famous films by the Lumiere brothers, The Arrival of the Train in La Ciotat, 1895, where you see a train in the distance, just like in the case of my footage, coming close. There's no panning shot, and the panning was invented only several years later, but it's at times static camera, but it comes. It's a wonderful film. And since I'm very familiar with the films of Kurt Kren, somehow it occurred to me that he made a film, Tree Again, which refers to a film about trees, which he had made 18 years before that. So it was, for me, it was quite obvious that I have to call my film Train Again, like he called his film Tree Again, with a huge tree in the film as well. The first film of Kurt Kren was many trees, so in a serial editing and very abstract in a way. And the second film, Tree Again, is a beautiful film about a single tree standing on a meadow. So for me, it was clear that I would call it Train Again. And trains is a train in general is one of the really big motifs in film history. I mean, besides the Lumiere film, so you can't even start counting many films there with trains in the history of filmmaking. So it's a motif which leads us immediately into the history of film. And in my case, I wanted to draw a comparison between the machinery of the analog film projector, since I'm an analog filmmaker, and the, so to speak, analog old iron horse with the moving on its tracks. So you have the film strip and the tracks, and you have the traverse, so the wooden stuff was behind, below the tracks, which reminded me of a single frame of the film strip. And the train itself, you have the windows, like the screen of cinema, or the perforation holes of the film strip. Also one frame as one perforation hole, the next, just like the windows of a wagon. And of course, the experience of the cinema goer. So it's sitting in a train, you watch out the window, and somehow it resembles what you experience in the cinema. So I could go on. I stop here. So the comparison was quite obvious. So the hardware side, also the projector, the film strip itself as a footage, as a material, and the trains. And then in the second half of my film, I start to let's say, instead of seeing landscape rolling by, like you would do when you look out of a train window, you start seeing those wonderful film history moving images, quotations from the early cinema, quotations from famous early avant-garde films, so from the 20s, I think exclusively, so maybe 20s, stuff like that. So I try to take us onto a ride through instead of a landscape, through the history of filmmaking. I should stop here for a moment.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Peter, por la respuesta. Sí, y lo que también la experiencia de ver tu película, así como tus películas anteriores también, me parece que es muy interesante esta idea de condensación, a lo mejor, que sucede en cómo existe la unión de estas múltiples influencias o homenajes que vos hablabas en esta película de Kurt Kren y del tren. Y en ese sentido, al hablar de fan footage también, que es una tradición muy importante y capital en la historia del cine austríaco, quería preguntarte un poco por esto que vos contabas, que el material había llegado a tus manos, y que después supongo que hay una cuestión de salir a buscar otro material, ¿no? Salir a buscar más materiales que hablen y que dialoguen con el material que llegó a tus manos. Y en el caso de tu cine me parece que algo que es muy bello de ver es cómo mezcla o cómo confluye o cómo convive dentro de tu interpretación y de tu reelaboración de la historia del cine lo canónico con lo popular, ¿no? O por así decirlo también, las buenas películas, entre comillas, con las malas, ¿no? Y eso me parece que habla también de una cuestión de saber leer o saber ver lo que el material está tratando de decir, independientemente de su contexto original, ¿no? Y en ese sentido quería preguntarte un poco por esta idea, que me parece que es una idea que es muy importante, ¿no? De la condensación o la fusión que sucede en tu cine, si eso es algo que va apareciendo a medida que vos vas empezando a trabajar y a pensar los metros de película que tenés, o forma parte de un esquema mayor.
Also, I think one of the main things behind my films is the enormous amount of time which I spent making my films and investing in my films. In that case of Train Again, it was 3 work seasons. A work season starts in October and ends in May to June. During summertime, I do not work in the dark room. I sit in our beautiful garden and we drink Campari. In winter time, I sit in the dark room and basically I work frame by frame, by frame by frame. And every frame contains up to 5, 6, or 7 layers of different images. So it's a very work-intensive and time-consuming way of producing films. In that case of Train Again, it took me 3 work seasons. Usually the films before were 2 work seasons, but that one 3 seasons. And during that time, that enormous amount of time, so you're constantly thinking about the film and how to move on and what would make sense as the next step, so to speak. And besides that, I'm constantly looking at footage, also outside the darkroom, of course, and trying to learn it by heart. But by foreign films, I often used one single feature film, long film, as a source material, which I've always learned by heart. It's like my vocabulary, which I try to memorize. And once you have memorized it and really internalized every single shot and every single movement and any single tiny detail in the images, it comes up like words, like when I'm talking, so I don't have to think much about the words which I'm going to use in the very next split second. It simply comes up, so to speak. So that's the secret of talking in the way I do with my films and with my images. And the condensation takes place automatically if you layer so many images as on top of each other, and the effect should be, or the outcome should be something like what I call physical cinema. The blood pressure should raise while you watch my films, and I could talk a lot about why is that, and what's the advantage of that. But one of the big reasons why I do that is to make clear that we are talking about a film which lives in the cinema and only in the cinema, the dark room where we all sit together and decide to sit still. We agree on a certain time where we meet, we agree on a certain space where we meet, we go inside, somebody closes the door, now it's dark, we decide not to talk, not to eat, not to use the fucking cell phone, which includes also not to light it up in the dark. We keep it in our pockets, and we all watch in the same direction. And that opens the possibility for that really strong experience, a physical experience, which cannot be reproduced at home with Netflix or whatever with TV. It's cinema. So that's one of the main things what I try to convey. Plus, the way I make my films with analog footage, with my copying techniques, that could not be done with a computer. That can only be done with classical analog cinema, which is vanishing. So I'm not the one who's going to stop that process. It's going to, while it will survive in some niche, so like cinema takes, but in the broader scheme, it will be gone within a few years. The Train Again, as you know, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, and it was the only film on 35mm. So the main contest plus all the side bars, so the side sections, not a single analog film with the exceptions of Train Again. So much for the state of analog cinema right now. And the film itself, Train Again, is about that Ablöse, how do you say it in English? Also that transformation. You have the horses at the beginning, which was the main means of transportation, and that it was replaced by the iron horse. That's what happens, and it's very sad, and I miss the horses also all our towns were really stinky at the time when everybody was using horses. Anyway, that's what happens. But I wanted to show what we are losing. We are losing it, but I want to show the specific, really specific beauty of analog cinema, which cannot be replaced with digital cinema. Digital cinema has its own advantages, but it's really a completely different animal.
Sí, sí, sí. Bueno, muchas gracias. Y esto medio que nos lleva a una pregunta central, o a lo mejor la pregunta definitiva que me interesaba también hacerte respecto a Train Again, y ampliarla un poco al resto de tu producción, que tiene que ver obviamente con esta cuestión del cine físico, el cine hecho a mano, tus películas en cuarto oscuro, como vos las has definido, y sobre todo en la actualidad, en la que en el presente, como vos bien decís, el hecho de que tu película haya sido la única en fílmico en Cannes ya es un testimonio de algo que ya está, digamos, muy avanzado, ¿no? Esta eliminación del soporte cinematográfico. Pero quería preguntarte porque muchas veces el cine experimental, el cine de vanguardia, la manera que tiene de contrarrestar esa muerte del cine es muchas veces tender hacia un tipo de trabajo mucho más abstracto, o de exacerbar a lo mejor esa formalidad o esa fisicalidad del cine. Y si bien tu cine es uno de los grandes testimonios de todo ese trabajo manual, me parece que también, más allá de lo que a primera vista es una idea o es un trabajo sobre la abstracción y sobre el trabajo plástico, hay siempre un interés muy fuerte por la narración, ¿no? por contar, usar esas imágenes para contar la historia que vos querés contar, ¿no? Y es una fuerza, me parece, narrativa que es decisiva y que distingue mucho tus películas de otras películas de fan footage. Y en ese sentido me interesaba preguntarte cómo trabajás esta suerte de narración manual, yo diría, porque es una narración como lo que vos venías diciendo, que la vas tocando y la conocés de memoria, la película. ¿Y cómo trabajás eso si existe la idea o la posibilidad de pensar en guiones de tus películas, ¿no?
Well, not necessarily a script in the original sense, but so usually I have a kind of a mini story to tell. Train Again is not the best example, by the way. So it's relatively, the narration is relatively minimal, but I consider myself as a narrative filmmaker. So my films tell, just as you just said, I totally agree, tell stories. That's why, which brings us back to the cinema, by the way. My films do not work in the white cube. My films do not function in a museum. I need an audience which is willing to start to watch a film from the beginning to the end. And the audience in a museum, so you can witness it if there's a dark room with a curtain, and you go in and there's a monitor and something is moving, and people stand around, and maybe as it looks interesting, they sit down for a while and they get up again and they leave. My films do have a beginning and then the story and an ending, and that's 20 minutes. And that's the time as usually nobody brings us. It's really to spend in the museum. By the way, as there's no beginning time, so to speak, in the museum. So yes, so it's about the story, and that's really important for me. I mean, it's the guidance which I need to move along in the film, to make step by step by step by step. It's always about the story, which might change over the course of those 2 or 3 years. But usually it's really the guide which takes my hand and leads me through the enormous amount of images which I have to conquer or to use.
Oh, muchas gracias. Sí, y también me parece que para finalizar un poco, ¿no? O redondear un poco la idea películas que están hechas para el cine, ¿no? Para una sala de cine y para el espectáculo incluso popular del cine, ¿no? O la idea de lo que el cine, digamos, la idea esencial del cine, ¿no? También tu cine le presta mucha atención a una cuestión que a lo mejor en este tipo de trabajos más materiales, más físicos o más plásticos, no, a lo mejor no se le da tanta importancia, que es en ese sentido empujar un poco o complementar esa narración a través del sonido, ¿no? Y a través de estas grandes bandas sonoras creadas por uno de tus grandes colaboradores, que es Dirk Schaffer, y que hace poco incluso, si no me equivoco, se publicaron como 2 álbumes, ¿no? Las bandas sonoras de tu colaboración con él. Y en ese sentido, también quería preguntarte por el rol protagónico que vos le das al sonido en tu cine, y que también es un acto de llevarlo hasta las últimas consecuencias, encargándoselo o colaborando con otra persona, ¿no? Me parece que ahí también hay un diálogo que tiene mucho que ver con esta idea de una colaboración cinematográfica.
Yes. I once said in an interview that I make films to be able to work with Dirk Schäfer. I'm such a huge admirer of what he does and how he does it. I mean, you might think of most soundtracks, and that includes soundtracks by colleagues, as in the so-called avant-garde field, somehow of broad, so flächig, as it's like moving along, and he thinks in the vertical structure. His kind of dealing with soundtrack is very similar to what I do in the darkroom. The work process itself is interesting. Also, I make the film, it's finished, including credits, opening and closing credits, and I don't change a single frame after that. It's being transferred onto a digital format, and then it's being sent through internet to Dirk from Vienna to Berlin. He lives and works in Berlin, and then he starts composing bits by bits by bits. So let's say 10 seconds or 30 seconds, sometimes even a little bit more and sometimes less. And he sends back tiny little files with the moving images, as the combined images, and we talk on the telephone. And there's another thing about which I really appreciate about Dirk. He's totally open for suggestions, for requests. I may ask him, could you please do that and that and that, include that? And I have a vague idea, and I say, could you include Teiji Ito soundtrack of Maya Deren somehow? And he comes up with some genius solution and doing just like that. So he's not the kind of artist who would say, leave me alone. No, everything has to come from my own artistic mind. So we can really cooperate, which is maybe normal for filmmaking, I don't know, but for sound engineering. But anyway, I appreciate it very much. And so in the end, there's a finished soundtrack, and it's being synchronized with the film or transferred onto my film. That's it.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Peter, de vuelta por estar con nosotros y nosotros acá hablando sobre tu última película. Y para finalizar, me interesaría a lo mejor espiar un poco, si es que es posible, ¿no? Primero preguntarte si esta serie de Rush Series concluye con Train Again, y independientemente de si sí o no, también saber si ya estás embaucado en uno de estos grandes temporadas de trabajo o de empezar a pensar nuevas articulaciones de fan footage o para una nueva película tuya.
Well, my next Aufgabe, task, is I received maybe 200 reels of footage from narrative films, incomplete prints. So it's like usually a complete print would consist of 5 to 7 reels. every reel 20 minutes, about 20 minutes long, and my task is to watch all of them. And I don't have a project right now, but I'm sure as soon as I start watching those reels, something will pop up in mind. It's always the footage itself is the starting point. Also you have to be honest to your footage, so to speak. Also do not create abstract ideas in your mind and try to apply that to the footage. It's always the other way around. The footage has to start to talk to you. And it was the same with the Russians. So these were commercials, 6 hours of unfinished, or the raw footage for commercials, never finished commercials. Yeah, but I didn't have the finished commercials. And I had no idea what to do with it. It was overwhelming, but it was hilarious in many cases. And I knew that I wanted to do something with it. And I watched it over and over and over again, my work process. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, early cinema has a lot to do with avant-garde filmmaking. So Tom Gunning, the film theoretician, film scientist, also pointed that out. And I should make a film which refers to early cinema and early avant-garde films. That's coming attractions. So again, now I have those 200, maybe 200 film reels, and I will start having a dialogue with my footage, and we'll see if it's what's the result.
Bueno, estaremos esperando entonces a ver lo que sale de esos 200 rollos de película. Muchísimas gracias, Peter.
Me too.
Muchísimas gracias, Peter, de vuelta por estar con nosotros y nosotras presentando tu película en el Festival Internacional de Cine de Mar del Plata.
Thank you.